State Senator Adam Hinds spent nearly 10 years working on issues at the heart of U.S. national interest in the Middle East. His time at the United Nations overlapped with John Bolton, then U.S. ambassador. Senator Hinds sat down with me to offer his thoughts on Bolton's appointment to National Security Advisor by President Donald Trump.
I was in the United Nations for about 10 years, and I was there during the time when he was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I was based in Iraq, so I wasn't directly working with him in New York. But essentially, we got to see that, I suppose my concerns are based on three different things. One is he's been very clear about a violent resolution to international differences, and that's a big concern as we're heading towards key milestones in two countries of concern, Iran and North Korea.
He has a book called Surrender is Not an Option.
Correct. So that's one, and we can talk about the details of that, but it relates to certifying an exemption of sanctions on the Iran deal and others. And so that's one big concern. The second, I think, would be what seems to be signaling a shift in how the U.S. goes about multilateralism and international affairs in general, and how we've done it in the last 70 years since World War II. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the third one is what it signals for Donald Trump, a president that makes policy via tweet and kind of, I guess, emotion and that type of a reaction, and what it means when he starts replacing steady hands with folks who agree with him.
As you said, you were at the UN. You were there for about a decade, just under. In your time there, overlapped with Mr. Bolton. Do you think that your perspective, the one that you just outlined, is unique?
No, and in fact, it's we saw while he was there kind of very public conflicts between him and others in the international community. We have, and of course, senior officials at the United Nations as well. And so he brought an approach that was, that in fact led to his challenges in even being confirmed for the position in the first place. The time was 2005. There was a Republican-led Senate, and he had difficulties being confirmed, and therefore the recess appointment by then President George W. Bush.
The president sort of went around the process so he wouldn't have to go through the normal channels, and the president tapped him for that role. Why do you think the president persisted, given the fact that it was unlikely he was going to be confirmed, but the president persisted and said, I want him in this chair, I want him in this position?
I would not have any unique insight into that, but it is interesting that he was the Assistant Secretary for Disarmament, and of course, leading up to the Iraq War, that position was significant in the State Department and led to, interestingly, a lot of misinformation, it turns out, around the chemicals or the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam and Iraq
and why we went.
That's right.
So, when you worked as regional director for John Kerry for president, you were under who went on to be NSA National Security Advisor Susan Rice. Right. What was her approach to this role that Mr. Bolton is likely to be holding next week?
Well, maybe more importantly, I was still in the United Nations when she was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and she was abundantly clear about the strategic value for the United States and our national security interests, the value that international organizations and multilateralism has. Just as an example, John Bolton has been, opposed to biological weapons conventions, opposed to landmine conventions. Can you imagine the United States unilaterally going around and trying to protect our troops overseas or to meet our national interests related to biological weapons alone and doing it bilaterally everywhere? And instead, you have an organization that allows us to do it in a cost-effective way. And so Susan Rice was very clear on the cost-effectiveness to meeting U.S. national interests through international organizations like the United Nations.
And we saw, I think most people would recognize Mr. Bolton if they watch cable news. He's a frequent contributor to Fox. Yeah. His stance that he espouses there is very hawkish, very hard line. Do you think that is how he will actually operate this office? Or do you think, cable news is known for its bluster, it's known for its drama, it's known for its hype. Do you think that he will actually hold the position the way that we've seen him speak about it on television?
Unfortunately, we have a track record with him in the government as well, or else it would be easy to push that aside and say, well, he's a commentator. And so we're going to see very quickly, quite honestly. We have in May 12th is the next time that the United States and the president should sign an exemption for moving ahead with sanctions against Iran. And that is part of the agreement. And so if we choose not to, then that means that we could see a potential increase in tension in the Gulf again. And of course, we'd be going against against our European allies in this. And so we're going to find out right away if this is bluster, because this is at a time when his predecessor, H.R. McMaster, and Secretary of State Tillerson have been encouraging the president to sign those exceptions. He has then, for the last 3 years, Bolton has been talking about getting rid of the Iran deal. So here's a moment of truth in the month ahead.
In terms of turnover in this position, the National Security Advisor position, we've seen President Trump now moving toward his third person in this position. When we look at President Obama, he had about 3 people over the course of his entire 2 terms in office. Why do you think so much turnover in this position for this current president?
I mean, the understanding is that the previous National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, conflicted with the president personally and on policy, right? And so you can imagine that whether we're talking about the Iran deal, whether we're talking about pushing back on Russian aggression, whether we're talking about American commitments to NATO allies, there was tension in every area, and there are others as well, what to do in Afghanistan. And so that's another reason for concern, quite frankly, is that we've seen that H.R. McMaster and Secretary Tillerson were considered the thoughtful, deliberate, strategic approach to foreign policy, and what does it mean when we shift away from that and only get folks who will have agreed with the president before?
Given that you think that he's likely to agree with the president, you think he's going to sit in this position a bit longer than his predecessors?
Interesting point. I mean, now we might be getting into what does it mean in terms of the role of the National Security Advisor? Are they pushing policy, or are they managing policy and managing agencies? And I would imagine the tension would increasingly be between the White House and the Departments of Defense and State Department as a result of this, and rather than internal into the White House.
Any sense of who you personally would like to see take this role, as opposed to who the president has chosen in Mr. Bolton?
Wow, I would have to give that some thought. And being that I'm a Democrat, my list includes a lot of Democrats, which, by the way, isn't unprecedented that presidents would cross party lines. And so I guess it's generally a concern, though, that we're moving towards folks who agree with the president, and he's been on a increasing trend of releasing folks from his inner circle.
Bring you back to more your current role as state senator here. Criminal justice reform, we spoke with you about this in January when you were on the program. Yeah. We saw that it has finally moved ahead and gone to the governor. Are you pleased with the legislation as it is now being presented to the governor?
Yeah, I am. I'll tell you why. I mean, we've seen a pretty broad consensus, and I was very deliberate to meet with my multiple sheriffs and chiefs of police and the district attorneys in my district before the legislation was acted on. And there's a general consensus that there was something wrong with the system when we see so many people who are going to jail who have already been in jail, or so many people in jail dealing with mental health and addiction, and that on the one hand, and also my experience with folks who were having challenges in getting unnecessarily wrapped into the system and having trouble managing bail and getting out on their own when they were trying to leave jail. And a third major area of concern is the disproportionate impact on people of color and communities experiencing poverty. And so this was a deliberate effort to tackle all of those. And so we're happy. It's an incredibly comprehensive piece of legislation. There are certainly parts that I would have wished were in there, and parts that I'm not happy that are in there. But overall, it's an impressive effort, and we're happy with the outcome.